Welcome to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews, and convention panels. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, assigned to Ragnarok Story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and RPGpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. So thank you all for coming. I apologize for getting started a little bit late, as we did have some tech issues. This is the Grim Reaper Funeral and Mourning Customs in the 19th Century. I'm Beverly Stuart. This is Tracy Chan in full mourning here, and Madam Jennifer Perry. And we're all going to talk about various aspects of death in the 19th century. So, our introduction. Here's the things that we're going to talk about. So, embalming, mourning fashion, and etc., symbolism, which there's lots of, and then various customs of like seances, death photography, etc., and of course, superstitions. I'm going to start with embalming, and I'm going to read the speaker notes. Well, I can actually read it for now. My phone is just okay.
I'm guessing the ladies in full mourning never have to read it.
Okay, so we're going to read a little bit. So, embalming. I'm going to start off with. I'm not sure what's going on here. So this is an example of a mummy. I'm not saying that people were mummified in the 19th century, but that is the root of embalming. This is actually a mummy that was put on display in Alabama for at some point recently. So the purpose of embalming was to preserve the body, to prevent delay the decay. It's going to decay. Many cultures did it. It was done in Egypt, the Aztecs, Tibetans did it, some Nigerian tribes, and some others too. I just mentioned a few of them here. And it was done for religious and cultural reasons. In Egypt, it was done by special priests, and it was a big process. It took like 70 days, I think. So the priests would take out most of the organs. They left the heart in, as they felt that the heart was where the soul or the intellect dwelt, so that has to stay. And so all the other organs were taken out and buried separately with the body. And then the body was dried out with natron, which is a type of salt. And then when it was fully dried, then they would wrap the body in linen, and the mummy. All right. Okay. So here's an example of some embalming fluids that were used in the 19th century. Various chemicals, pretty toxic to whoever was using them, and they did not use formaldehyde yet at this time. That didn't come up until 1890. All right. Pre-20th century, most people actually died at home and were buried nearby. There was usually a cemetery that they were just taken to. So there was really no need for embalming for the most part until the Civil War. When the Civil War began, a lot of soldiers, they didn't want to be buried on enemy ground. I'm official notes. All right. They didn't want to be buried on enemy ground. They had to be shipped home, but they would rot before the bodies would rot before they actually got home. Yeah, so there's some stuff here that's not on the right. Didn't remember. Okay, so all right, so Dr. Thomas Holmes is the father of modern embalming. So he developed his methods by studying the Egyptian methods, and prior to his research, embalming fluids contained arsenic, mercury, zinc compounds. They were pretty dangerous, as I mentioned. So he developed a method of embalming using a patented fluid pump, and then he personally claimed to have embalmed 4,028 soldiers and officers, field and staff. He was very proud. Okay. So this is a picture of Abe Lincoln. So Lincoln was probably the most famous person to be embalmed at that time, and he was embalmed. His body was sent on a 2-week funeral tour from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, and each point where he stopped, he was re-embalmed a little bit more. So by the time he actually got to Springfield, he appeared mummified. Yeah, he was pickled. Okay, so grave robbing. Grave robbing was a thing that happened. So medical schools needed cadavers. Grave robbers called their business resurrection. Baltimore was a big hotbed of grave robbing. I believe we were talking about Maryland just recently, and a couple of us. And so there was Baltimore had a lot of medical schools. Johns Hopkins is a famous one. There's some others in nearby states. So Maryland had a temperate climate, so it was easy to dig the graves in the winter. So the ground wasn't frozen as it was in some nearby states. So medical schools often recruited their janitors to be on the lookout for freshly buried bodies. And bodies were dug up, usually from potter's fields, which were cemeteries where poor people were buried, didn't have family. And there was also a racist element to the resurrections because many of the bodies were from poor black people, and they didn't have a lot of family to speak for them. One story that I read was one thing that happened in Maryland. The bodies were, as you see on the slides, the bodies were dug up, stuffed in barrels with whiskey, shipped to medical schools by railroad, and the whiskey was sold as a stiff drink. And this continued for over 70 years. They got away with this horrible thing. This is a bad joke. Okay, and now I can.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can stand up and you can hear me. I know you think from the sound I probably called a lot of animals across the farm or something, but I haven't. But it's just mostly my relatives.
How many do you want me to change songs?
Okay. Just whenever you feel like it. By the way, if you like any of my little stuff up here, like the skulls or the flower or these, I usually have a door prize drawing at any of my events if you've ever been to them. But for this one, since Tracy was just having trouble, and she said, "What did the Victorian widow have trouble with her laptop and stuff?" At the end of this, I want somebody to give me a really good name of a Victorian widow dating website. I want one of you to come up with something, in the Victorian era. A lot of the fashions and behaviors were set by Queen Victoria. She died, after her husband, Prince Albert, died. Now, can you hear me in the back? All right. They had 14 children. She had 14 children, and then he dies. Just saying. Anyway, so they set the style for how people dressed, how they mourned. And it was the clothing you wore and how you wore it, like was this over or back, just failed, to find the stage of grief you were at the time. The rules were pretty strict, but there was some open interpretation, especially for gender and age. Factors would have to do with your relation to the deceased, the age of the person who was mourning, your financial status, personal choice, and the social expectations. Because to demonstrate and affirm one's gentility and respectability, you would have to mourn properly dressed and for a certain amount of time. Now for women, your husband dies, you have 2 years. 2 years minimum to mourn. Some women just kept on wearing them. If your parents died, 1 year's good. One of your children, a year. When it got to like grandparents or your brothers or sisters died, 6 months, 3 to 6 for aunts and uncles. So you can see where everybody felt. I have no idea how stupid this looks, but I know it feels weird.
It's not folding right, and that's why it keeps hitting you in the face.
Oh, okay. So.
Sorry. That was probably annoying you.
Yeah. What do we usually call the clothes that widows wore?
Weeds.
Weeds. You know what that came? I used to wonder, why would they say weeds? It was like they got weeds from the cemetery when they were walking. What was it? You know where it came from? It's an old English word. I don't know how to pronounce it. Waed, spelled W-A-E-D. And it meant garment or clothing. So the widow's weeds became widow's weeds. Doesn't sound so pretty, does it? Oh, Lord. Now I'm telling all of this in front of the queen of it all, y'all.
I love you too.
The fabrics, of course, were all black. Oh, who did I leave out? And who was mourning and how long?
Husbands.
Exactamente, mi amigo. Because the husband could get away with 6 months. Why? Well, he needed to be free to find a stepmother for his little children left behind. So he could even cut back to just a black armband for a while. It's 6 months. He's good. Yeah. He's back in play, as it were. The clothes, of course, were all dark and black and crepe, and if it was even something more sheer, it had to be, not see-through. The veil was worn on the front if you were out. The reason given was that you didn't want to see the widow's crying eyes. And also, because her husband had left, was dead, or because he had left everything to his mistress, whatever the reason. You didn't want to see the pain she had in crying eyes. And there was some superstition about maybe the soul near the end of the deceased would attach to somebody else. So did a lot of reattaching, rehoming themselves and so forth. So, of course, another reason why they wouldn't have wanted to wear those veils so long. Now, in the house, just with my family, you could just wear a widow's cap, like just a little black hat. But also the dyes that they used to make all these things so dark would be very irritable. They could just cause everything from eye irritation to rashes to even blindness.
The veil would literally make you cry. It was haunted.
She's right. You haven't seen her yet, have you? Now, sometimes after so many years for the widow, she could after 2 years, she could move to things like some grays or some lilacs. I don't know where. To me, lilac's a happy color, which is some muted purples or something. But the rules, for many people, the rules seem to elicit classicism and created hardship for those people who couldn't afford them. The discarding of mourning was supposed to be effected gradually because it would it spoke to people of it would shock people of good taste to see a light-hearted widow at once jump into colors from deep black mourning as though she were counting the hours. You can't let them know you're counting.
All of a sudden, the detective is sus.
So, now children weren't really put in black. One of the reasons was that they just didn't want to depress them and make them feel cowered in with all the dark clothing. And of course, this would just be the upper class kids, not because they had to work anyway. Any questions about the mourning clothes? Or there's a lot more too as far as the jewelry you would wear. It'd be something simple. You didn't want to attract attention if you wore any jewelry. It's like that, or colors. But also there were specific types of jewelry that were made with hair, and Tracy's going to tell you more about that later. And also about different types of etiquette and how people would have cards but had to look a certain way, be printed a certain way. So she's going to share all those good things with you. The only other thing I had was the widower. Still thinking about that dating app. Have you got any idea yet?
Play ball courtships.
What? What was that?
Play ball courtships.
Okay. I used to know a guy who would go to this musician after his wife died. He'd go, "Hi, I'm Wayne. Did I tell you I was a widower?" And then I found a cartoon in the New Yorker, and it's out in the desert. It's a bar. It's the bartender there, and there's a guy sitting at the bar and a woman, and the woman's looking at the man going, "A pillar of salt, you poor man." And the bartender's looking like. So that's my part on just the dress part of the customs. Do you have any questions or anything else?
How about for a dating app, instead of eHarmony, since it's from the Victorian, but VHarmony?
What for me?
VHarmony instead of eHarmony?
Oh, I like it. Everybody's going to hit it for us.
I really need that today.
Now, I did have one idea.
All right.
Back in black, find you next morning.
What was that?
Back in black, find your best next morning.
Kind of love it.
Oh, yes. Everybody come up with a dating app. Was it plenty of wills?
Great. I hope you'll forgive my impropriety, folks. I'm going to show my face now. Please be aware that it might be hideous.
This is sudden, and I feel like you're doing this too quickly. You need to gradually.
By layers.
Too quickly.
The veil has spoken.
So, what I'm wearing today is a first stage mourning veil, which was typically a block of sheer fabric lined, could be as large as 6 feet. So a woman in mourning in the Victorian era basically looked like a walking black triangle. However, they were able to accessorize. They did have mourning jewelry.
Maybe I should just use this. Can you guys hear me better?
Yes.
So Victorian mourning jewelry was definitely a thing. It was a huge fad because, well, death was so common, and so many people were in mourning so much of the time, including the very interesting jewelry that Queen Victoria wore to mourn her, 9 children that passed away, plus her husband, Prince Albert. It was something like that. So up in the top right, I have a picture of Queen Victoria's actual mourning jewelry up there. And some of it was actually sold at auction. So a bit shocking, but also a priceless treasure. Victorian mourning jewelry often featured more sentimental imagery than the skulls and crossbones of the Renaissance era. Middle Ages, of course, a ton of people died, and so they had this very macabre obsession. But in the Victorian era, it got a little gentler: angels, clouds, willow trees. Most common, of course, were the initials of the deceased. And so when someone died, to notify the friends, family, neighbors, they would actually commission these beautiful gilt mourning cards. And there's a couple examples here. And these were sent out after the funeral, just kind of notify people that the person had passed. And they were meant to be kept as a memento for pretty much ever. Has anyone heard of Victorian hair art? Has anyone worn hair art? Ah.
I have a beautiful treasure from 1882, and it's pressed under glass. It's actually my color of hair that I found in a shop in Portland, and I was like, oh, it's my past life coming back to me.
So hair, of course, disintegrates far slower than the rest of the human body, and in the Victorian era, it became a symbol for everlasting, not exactly life, but everlasting memory, everlasting love of the deceased. So it was not unknown for lots of common families to wear hair. And in this picture, you've got an image with a weeping willow and all this beautiful artwork in the back. The weeping willow is actually made of hair. And in the, let's see, in the upper right, also that would be just a lock of hair from the deceased. And it was pretty common for children to die. And if a child died, the parents would often carry a lock of the child's hair. Sometimes they would go a step further. They would make a doll that looked like their child. And they would give the doll the child's hair. And they would take care of the doll like it was their child until either the mourning period was over or the parents went crazy. Plot for the next horror movie, right? Yeah. Flowers and candles we always think of as very common funeral arrangements. Back in the Victorian era, they were kind of necessary. It stank when someone died. And especially if they died during the summer, the body was laid out on a bier and everyone had to come and pay their respects. And if you were traveling by carriage from 3 cities over, that might take a little while. In the days, weeks that you were waiting for the most important mourners to show up, the flowers and candles masked the scent of the body decaying. So that's fun. All right. We're going to talk about the best part, Victorian fads.
What does it mean? Oh, okay.
Victorian era. What a time to be dead. Gone but not forgotten, and everybody still wanted to talk to you. Everybody had a question. Everybody wanted to go on and on and on about something. But sometimes these seances weren't exactly like we thought, like we heard different things. The Victorian era, there were a lot of advances in science, technology. You know, we got the light bulbs, we got telegraphs. You can still hear me, right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's just that kind of that little rolling thunder back there. People seem to feel like they had more advances in their lives as far as knowledge, education, scientists, so forth. What kind of things do we have? Telegraph, sewing machine, lights. What else? Anybody?
Electric massager.
Electric massager?
Yeah.
That's when there's miracle, not the dead.
That's right. I remember when, okay. Not present. So people say, why? Why were they into it? Well, they were fascinated. They loved learning. They loved learning new things, and they were fascinated with this whole idea when the seances came about. It was popular in the States as well as in the United Kingdom. And plus, too, you got to remember also there were a lot of people dying, especially, health and sanitation and food cleanliness and preparation weren't all that they should have been. And people didn't understand sometimes diseases in keeping clean or how to take care of something or cure. All the cures that we know today weren't around. So people pretty much knocked off. That's why you would hear about people who would lose children and spouses and so forth, as well as war and then civil war and so forth. So people are losing family members, they're hurt, and they just want to know, where did they go? Did they go there? Did they go there? Do they still know who we are? What happened to them? And then the psychic mediums. Well, the spiritualist movement was also a big thing, and it was heralded by some pretty big name people. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle even set aside working on Sherlock Holmes novels for 6 months, a year or something to dig into spiritualism. He was a very big proponent of it. And people also in both countries were into it. Of course, Queen Victoria, because she wanted to reach to her beloved husband, Prince Albert. And even in the States, people like, I have these scientists' names, Frederick Douglass.
Mary Todd Lincoln.
Huh?
Mary Todd Lincoln.
Mary Todd Lincoln, yes.
Yeah.
So everybody was fascinated with finding out. Then one day, and there were people who would have, this little seances meet. It was spiritualist groups, spirit groups would get together and meet, usually in someone's home, maybe or something, or coffee shop, whatever. And then one day we learned about some gals over in the States who lived in what they thought was a haunted house where there might have been a body buried underneath. And these were the young Fox sisters. And they would tell people, no, there's a body there, this place is haunted, we hear stuff or whatever. They began trying to have a seance with friends. I think they moved out of that house, but then went back. People were trying to find, they did find, I think, some bones and hair or something, a little bit here and there. I don't know what it was, but I've got a lot of area behind my house, and my dog keeps going out, and he keeps finding parts of a deer skeleton and bringing them, so I just keep putting them in the hanging baskets. I got some skulls. It's fine. So I guess somebody found that, put things underneath there, and then, you don't know. It could have been set up. It could have not. But anyway, these gals started doing pretty good. They were having seances, and people felt like they were reaching their dead loved ones, and felt like they were getting reassurance, getting guidance, getting advice on what they were doing at the time. And the Fox sisters and their oldest their oldest sister ended up going over to England, where they were very popular. And there were also some mediums in the UK that were also popular. Now, because I'm limited on the time I have to talk about this, to get more information, always go to anything with this lady. I was looking at some things in a book about it with my friend, and I said, my friend knows all about this stuff. She's the and then I turned the page, and she had written that article, so I said, okay, yeah. Not the cool moment. But one day, the Fox sisters, one of them had gotten married to the Arctic explorer Kent. Okay, his name is Elisha Kent. And he loved her dearly, but he did not want her involved in this. He thought it was, his faith and religion, and God didn't approve. And he really he had her convert to Catholicism, thinking that, well, because there's, things with like spirits and saints, that'll kind of take care of her excitement. Like, did you ever see the Bletchley Circle? Okay, when the woman's husband finds out that she might have, he goes, well, I bought you some crossword puzzles and stuff. Won't that kind of help your need to figure stuff out, help you out? But he really wanted her to denounce it, not do it. So after he died, she did. And their whole empire fell down. But there was but there were some people who did get a lot of, receive a lot of credit and a lot of money, because they were very good at what they did. And they did seem to reach people that people felt like, well, that's undisputably, my uncle talking or my aunt. There's a woman from America named, she was from New Hampshire, Leonora Piper, her name. And she was, when she was a little girl, just playing in the garden, she kept getting these funny feelings, and then she felt like something hit her in the head, but there was nobody there. And then she said, she goes into the house, tells her parents, she said, oh, and Aunt Sarah says she's not really dead, she's still with us. No, your Aunt Sarah's not dead. And then they get a telegram later. And I think there was another situation, too, where she was able to tell somebody at a large meeting that somebody had died, and they go, no. And a telegram came later. So Leonora Piper, at one time, was making $20 per session, which would be about $500 or so today. So, on the one hand, one of the best things about seances, and like I said, they're not always the way we see in some shows. First, let me say this, but sometimes people would get together on a regular basis, like have a spirit gathering once a week in their home. Sometimes they would open with a prayer, maybe some songs or talking about someone, then put their hands together and then try to reach out to the spirits and see who reached back, if they heard a knocking. And yes, there's always going to be whatever it is, there's always going to be some huckster faking things that make things look bad for everybody else. Because I can't say if some of these people were legit or not, but some of them may have been. But think about, too, at the time that this was happening in the Victorian era, say you've got a woman who doesn't have a lot of money, who does seem to be experiencing some psychic ability, or say she's widowed, she suddenly has a business, and she suddenly has income to help herself and her family. So it's hard to look at everything, in like a one or the other or a black and white way. But in some ways it was very good, but for people who needed money, but if people were getting ripped off, of course that's bad. But have any of you, I know somebody's had seances or done seances, whether you were a kid or when you were older. Anybody? Really? Anybody else? Was it when you were kids? Tell me, what did you do? Did you do it from what you saw on TV, or how did you do it?
Ouija board.
Ouija board. Ouija board, okay. And did you get any results?
Yeah, but it was Bobby. He was cheap.
Any more? Okay, you?
We just had inconclusive results.
Inconclusive, okay. Anyone else?
These bone-chilling stranger things, guidance.
Things
Nothing.
moved.
Did lights light up? Did they go out? Things move around the room?
Anybody? Nothing moved? Nobody's dog licked somebody's ankle and made them jump?
I was in Manhattan's one of Manhattan's most haunted houses, the Morris Jamel Mansion, up in the Washington Heights. And we had a group of people that had a flashlight that was unscrewed. And we were in Eliza Jamel's bedroom, and we were getting no results. The male paranormal investigator was asking a bunch of very intrusive questions. And so I said, at a certain point, I just blurted out, and I wasn't running this. I was just a participant. It was just there to make the museum money because it costs millions of dollars to upkeep this colonial mansion in uptown Manhattan. And finally I said, you are all strangers. This is mixed company. You are men in Eliza Jamel's bedroom. This is inappropriate. And the flashlight went off. And so the paranormal investigator got the hint, and all the men left. And then the ladies had a lovely conversation with the lady of the house about whether she did or she did not like people in her home. And it was fascinating, but it was just a flashlight that was, just unscrewed so that only the barest filament was there. But it proved to me that context is everything when you're actually addressing a period appropriate ghost, who was known to throughout the many instances of her showing up and just kind of trying to take control of the situation in her house that she had left in her name because she made millions in real estate ventures as a woman in the 19th century, and she wanted to know that that was her house.
I remember having a girlfriend spend the night with me once when I was in high school, and I have and she was all into witchcraft. We would hear people talk about, they were into witchcraft, and this was back in probably around 1970 or 71. And I remember my youngest brother, Scott, my parents doted on him. Everything he did was cute. Even if it was wrong, it was cute. And so my friend, she made a pentagram and put my mother's whole name on there. And she went by her middle name, not her first name. But then she put some sealing wax on. That was all the rage then too. And my little brother I don't know why he was in there when she did that, but he did it. He goes into her room and says, and calls her by her first name. He goes, "Hey, Marjorie." She turned into another beat and beat the crap out of him, and she's never hit him before or since. So I just said, okay. So yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. Well, you have any more questions for me? Thank you so much. And
Please forgive me, folks. I'm
Once
going to
again.
show my face again.
So soon.
Just for a moment.
Too soon. Too soon.
She's smiling too. She's up to see.
Is she suspicious?
plenty of widows.
Victorian.
Did anyone come to our panel last year about serial poisoners? Yes. Just a completely unrelated side question.
No, I got very related.
So this is an especially fun topic for me because I am a professional photographer, and this is actually the death photo fad and headless photo fad are two completely separate things. But on the right we've got a headless photo, which was quite interesting, and it was pretty much the earliest example of Photoshop. Victorian Photoshop, if you will. So they created these crazy headless photos by taking two images and then processing them in such a way that they could kind of cut and paste the head and then place it in her hands. So there's a whole lot of these. You can actually find some of them for sale on eBay today. If that's what you're into. Now, this handsome dead guy right here, let's talk about him for a moment. He was, let's see, died in 1858, approximately, and his family dressed him up, cleaned him up, combed his beard and mustache out, and then decided to sit him for portraits. Completely acceptable, very common, and this would have been kept on someone's mantle or as a memento, as a keepsake for the family. And in some cases, it was actually, it was very acceptable to do that. The dead children are the worst, and I've seen some of those photos. I decided not to include them just to spare you folks, but they are out there and they're heartbreaking. I just wanted to point out that these exist, and there's actually a lot of them in circulation today. There are people with large collections. You're nodding your head like you have some.
Just a couple.
Do you have any tips on where to find interesting photos like this?
I mean, if you find like an antique shop that has like an oddities kind of thing, there is a traveling show, the Oddities Expo, that will come around to different cities. So keep track of the Oddities Expo and when it comes, and that is a very good place for it. Also, my friend Amanda Woomer runs the Traveling Museum of Memento Mori, and she very often will have, when she sets up her museum, she's based out of Buffalo in upstate New York. When she sets up her museum, she has a bunch of those in her possession, and then that helps fund the museum as well, which is talking about death customs as sort of which she finds to be very, very healing in dealing with her own modern loss. So that's I think in some ways why it's coming back into fashion, because we as a modern society still don't deal very well with loss.
It's something we've really never learned to do. Yes, sir.
The Bisbee Museum out in the terrace has some examples.
Oh, I'll have to go look at that. Fascinating. So the garden variety of death photography was basically what you would expect at a wedding. They would sit the person up in their coffin, or they would get a nice special chair for them. They'd put them in their best dress or suit, and then the entire family would array themselves around this person. Sometimes they would hold their hand, or they would put a hand on their shoulder to keep the corpse from falling over, presumably. And then the photographer would take a photo of the entire family with the corpse, and that would be their memento. And yeah, that's my question.
There was a book that I found. So I found this book in a thrift store years ago. It was Death Photography of Wisconsin or something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, that was the first time I'd ever heard of death photography. It was just, it was a pretty eye-opening. Okay, so customs and superstitions. So there were a lot of superstitions during this time. First of all, the deceased had to be carried out feet first, and I think if they were carried out head first, then I guess it was thought that they would look back and we can haunt someone or haunt their spirit would remain. Thank you. They could call someone to follow them, is basically what it is. So, feet first. Okay, so then there was the death door. So, a lot of things were done to prevent bad luck. So, it was considered bad luck to carry the deceased out of the front door. Because that's the door that the living used. So, wealthier families had a different door to carry out the deceased. I guess. Probably. And I guess if you were poor, you just had to take your chances. Okay, so clocks were stopped at the time of death, and that's to prevent bad luck. Mirrors were covered, so again, to prevent the deceased from becoming captured in the glass. I guess their spirits would stay. Family photos would be turned face down. This would be to prevent a family from becoming possessed by the deceased. A fun fact I learned, doctors didn't always know if a person was really dead. So sometimes people were buried alive, but they were actually in a coma. So, for example, if they had cholera, this was common. And so there was a whole industry of safety coffins built around this. And so sometimes there would be... I know. Yeah. So that way, if you were, actually alive, you could, hopefully someone would hear you bang on the lid of your coffin. But they would often have a bell. Sometimes a bell would be inside the coffin, so you could ring the bell. If you were lucky, the gravedigger or somebody would hear the bell go off, and they would come and dig you out. You have to be around. And sometimes the gravediggers were paid to keep watch and listen for the bells. And grave robbing was a concern because, you could still get in there. So some graves are actually roofed over or covered with a protective grate. So then, if you were still alive,
Sorry.
But no one was going to go in there and get your body either. So.
And you wouldn't turn into a vampire.
That's right, no vampires. Yes.
Many things. I really genuinely don't know what they did in the Victorian era when they had to read computers.
So why don't you conclude with just a brief discussion of the concept of memento mori? It lasted for, it's been around since long before the Victorian era, of course. And basic translation is remember that you must die. Egyptian, Greek, Roman, every culture has basically had this. If you remember the whole, 300? The 300 movies? It's a big concept in there as well. Classical antiquity and Christianity, it's not necessarily a bad thing though. It encourages your reflection on your mortality, but it also encourages you to live well. And skulls, hourglasses, flowers, wilting, these symbols that have been part of our art and architecture for, aeons, basically. And so in Christianity, it actually became a sort of reminder of the fleeting nature of the human body and earthly pleasures and urge to focus on the afterlife or on heaven, for better or for worse. In funerary art, it emerges quite a lot on tomb paintings, chapels, sayings on tombstones, and in vanitas paintings, which use objects like skulls and candles to symbolize the temporary nature of life, the impermanence of life. It also influenced a lot of really famous literature and music, of course. Music during the Middle Ages, during the plague, when everybody was dropping dead, memento mori. One day your friends, your neighbors, your family could be there, the next day they couldn't. It was just a fact of life. In modern times, danse macabre. If you folks actually go out to the temporal entourage out there, the T-Scouts, there's a quest for doing the dance macabre. I'm not going to tell you what it is, you'll have to figure it out for yourself. Skulls do help. philosophers like Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre reflected on it. They urged people to confront death, live meaningfully, and memento mori thus serves as a reminder for us to remember death, remember our mortality, but also remember the importance of living with purpose. And that's where we'll leave you. Beverly Stuart, I'm Tracy Chan. This is Madam Jennifer Perry. Thank you all for coming to our
Anyone has questions?
Yes.
Or would you like to have time to answer some
Q&A. Do we have any questions?
I did. For an embalmed body, was it more or less valuable to a resurrection man? I mean, it didn't keep better, but, was the doctors a little more less buying it because it came from a grave?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, my guess is that they just wanted bodies.
Yeah, no, it didn't matter. Actually, the preservation would be helpful. Because the whole thing was like they just wanted to take it apart to dissect. They wanted it was an
anatomist.
They wanted to see what the interior of the human body looked like.
Yeah. So if it's pickled, it's not a huge deal.
Have you ever
The pickling was helpful. Yeah,
it's definitely pickled.
but then there's the legal jeopardy. So so it would be this double-edged sword of like because if you were a resurrectionist and you were the doctor. I mean, there were mob riots about it in New York. I'm based in New York, and I'm a New York tour guide. So we talk about the bone riots of the late 1700s, where there were all of these grave robbers who were digging up bodies for medical schools, and it was usually the poor people whose graves were being robbed, and it just got to a point where there was literally a riot targeting the medical schools. And Alexander Hamilton had to go and try to calm people down, and they had to call the National Guard, and people got shot, and it hurt because of all of it. So they passed something called the Bone Bills, which was the first regulation of cemeteries to try to prevent this stuff. So it got into very class-based, like you were talking about, class-based about who was allowed to have elaborate mourning and who was not allowed. It was just the idea that the poor folks literally couldn't rest. In any way, life or death. So
right, and then who was able to get away with doing these resurrections as opposed to, and then who would get prosecuted for it. So that's also, I believe.
Yeah.
There's also a book about it. The Body Snatchers.
Yeah, The Body Snatchers is a great book if you are curious about it's a very good book.
I read it.
It's very good.
Well, since you were mentioning about the medical schools, I actually do look over at the U of A, and I have to go into the anatomy section every now and then. And someone asked me once to poorly explain my job. Now, so it was like, I work around students and dead bodies, but not necessarily one and the same. Because I work in a teaching hospital, and I happen to be in the same room that they were working on this job.
I'm just going to ask, was cremation, did that exist back then, or was that something that...
Mostly in the East. Asian countries traditionally have cremated their deceased and not buried them. Like in China, cremation is ages old.
And it was actually the first cremation here in the States was the Theosophical Society. That was founded by Madame Blavatsky, who was a medium. She was, I think, Ukrainian Russian, and the Theosophical Society believed in. They were using a lot of Eastern religions in their work, and they believed in cremation. And we're talking about how it was good in urban environments to use cremation because the cemeteries were all filling up. So I think it was the first legal one was like in I don't remember exactly the date, but I think it was the 1870s. But it had to be this. It was this whole thing, and it was very shocking at the time. It was very divisive at the time. But it was a whole theosophical group, and it was out in Pennsylvania is when it happened. And so that started to get the national discussion here in America about it. It was still divisive for another several decades before it would become any kind of common practice.
And still, it's also religious.
Yeah, there you go.
It's my last chance.
There you go. And it's still, I mean, some religions do it, and some were like, nope, don't do that.
Right, because there's a belief that you have to have the body to continue on. You can't have a physical body. If you do not have a physical body, you cannot enter paradise or whatever. They've never taken the. It's the same thing that if you think about the Egyptians had to preserve the body for the person to be in the afterlife. It carried through all the way through. All of the Western religions do that. And so, yeah, cremation is a very weird thing in Western society, because if you're Jewish, if you're practicing any of the Western faiths, there's only a few that say, okay, cremation's okay, but most of the older and harder core, quote unquote, harder core ones, I say you have to have a body. There has to be a body for you to be resurrected at the end of days.
Well, there's two things on that. The Catholic Church came out against cremation because there was a group saying, burn the bodies, there's nothing after. So they sat there and said, no cremation. And it wasn't until fairly recently, about 100 years, that they said, okay, but you have to put the ashes somewhere.
Yeah, they have to be interred.
You have, for nothing better to say, they now have mausoleums that are just apartment complexes for your ashes.
The columbarium,
Yep. And the other one is it's not just a Western or old world thing, because the Mayans would basically dry out the bodies, and you'd go in there, and there were festivals. You brought out the family.
Oh yeah,
to attend.
I was just saying on the Western faiths that I understand, because the Mayans, the indigenous peoples of the Americas have very different spiritual and understanding of what the body is. Because you had sky burials where the animals took the things away. You had cremation in some places. The Incas took people up into the mountains and buried them on volcanoes.
But it's one of those things where it's like, you're having a party, let's get Grandpa. I kind of like that.
That actually is in parts of Southeast Asia. The people are for generations cared for in a mummified state, and at some point, and I think it has to do with when they actually forget the person or the personality of the person, they can then put the body in the ground. But for generations, these people are paraded out. They're still doing it.
Well, it's I forget the idea. They do these elaborate funerals, and the caskets are built to look like something personal that the guy had. Like there's one where the guy owned the first outboard motor, and his casket looks like an outboard. But these took a time to do, so they would wrap them up and stick them in the rafters of the house where the body would dry out. But they weren't dead; but they weren't alive.
Right.
And it was that bridging between the two.
Just an interesting side note, in Hawaii, cremations are actually very common amongst the secular crowd, especially surfers. When a surfer dies, barring any sort of religious beliefs that prevent it, all their friends paddle out into the ocean with their ashes, and then they scatter the ashes on the waves. And the belief that you're going back to the ocean, the belief that you're going back to the earth, back to the fire, is very strong in Hawaii. It's not necessarily a specific religion, it's just kind of the nature of the place, I think.
Like a local cultural belief. Because it's
I wouldn't say cultural.
Not cultural in that it is common in that place for that specific group of like-minded people.
Yeah.
Has anyone else ever gotten those postcards from the Neptune Society? Want you to come and talk about having your body visited? All right, I don't know where you live, but when I get them, they're always meeting at Red Lobster. I've kept them just to prove that. I don't know why. I can't walk by the lobster tank and go sit there on that. I couldn't. Anybody? Oh, by the way, and thanks everyone who came and sat and was patient through our problems. If anyone had a suggestion or a name for the online Victorian Widows dating site, there's plenty of widows, plenty of orphans, whoever, come on up and get something. I've got these cute little coffin candles.
You guys want
skulls?
The link to our slideshow, just like
yes.
Let us know, because you have a whole list of resources.
And it has a list of links to our sources.
I'll post it on the Wild Wild WestCon Facebook community, but if you don't do Facebook, if you're a little more old school, write your email. excuse me, sir, that was my husband.
It
was.
I want you to hold it up and say, alas, poor York. You don't do it well.
He had a small head. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you all very
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play-In Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, please check out D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Ragnarok Enroll a Scion Hero to Ragnarok Story. Also, check out our Patreon page for more content and behind-the-scenes things, as well as joining us for a one-shot game or two.